Last week, the Department of Justice charged 4 current and former police officers with federal civil rights violations. The officers were involved with securing and executing the search warrant that led to the death of Breonna Taylor, a medical worker who was shot and killed by police officers in Louisville, Kentucky in March 2020 during a raid on her apartment. The charges include lying to obtain a search warrant for Taylor's apartment.
Senior Lecturer of African American Studies at the University of Maryland, Jason Nichols, and Charles Love, Executive Director of Seeking Educational Excellence, are here to discuss. Welcome to you both, and thank you so much for joining us. So you both wrote op-eds for us at Newsweek, competing op-eds about this topic. So I wonder if we could start with you each sort of laying out your reaction to this news. Let's start with you, Charles.
Well, my reaction was, like much of what you hear in the news, is what is the priority? So it wasn't that I was okay with police officers lying to get a warrant. If that happened, they definitely should be charged. It was more along the lines of, what do we prioritize? Is this something we should celebrate? Is this going to fix problems that we believe are systemic? So that was kind of the point.
And Jason?
Yeah, so I think it's always important to hold people accountable, particularly when they've committed a crime. I think it's even more egregious when it comes from law enforcement. And I think none of us are safe if, and again, I know we have 2 African-American men on this panel, and it seems like this is probably a race issue, but I think no American is safe when law enforcement can lie on you. And I think that these charges were important. I think the Justice Department is investigating a whole lot of things, so I don't think this is a priority issue. You can look at, they're investigating Hunter Biden, they're investigating January 6th, and they're investigating these police officers who apparently have committed a crime. So I think that that's important. I think it's important to hold people accountable when they commit crimes.
Right, because this really could happen to anyone. I mean, it's, you know, it took place in an apartment, right? It was somebody else. It's private property. It's not, this isn't one of those police errors that's like heat of the moment or some, you know, confrontation on the street. And by the way, those, you know, when the police are responsible too, I think should be handled. But this is in a way chosen by law enforcement. They went in the manner that they did at the time they did, with the attitude and the tactics that they used. And then this resulted, and I think a lot of people, myself included, are like, well, I don't want this. If you can say if this is standard procedure, I want the procedures changed, because this feels like it could happen to anyone. So what do how do you, I guess, process that, Charles, in your thinking that, like, maybe this, what I'm understanding that you're saying is that there are other priorities or that we should have other priorities regarding law enforcement. I presume perhaps you mean addressing rising crime or something like that.
No, I'm not even saying that it shouldn't be, again, that it shouldn't be investigated. And definitely I wouldn't want police officers to be able to do that. And I agree with both of you and Jason, that it makes people less safe and it hurts the relationship. What I'm saying is that, you know, it's kind of like, why are they doing it and what are the end results? And so what I mean by priority is, are they saying that this case is somehow, you know, more egregious and more important than others, is all I'm saying. So it's kind of like, it's supposed to be a win. Like, what are they trying to get? Like, a lot of things, I don't look at things from a political standpoint, but I know many people do. And so if there are squeaky wheels, if there's political gains to be made, then people will do these things. So that's what I'm really questioning, not whether if a police officer does something wrong, they should be investigated. That's not it. It's more along the lines of why they're doing it, why, when there was, you know, what happens in a lot of these cases too is, it's not just that situation of those police officers. If you look at Ferguson, Chicago, and other places like that, it's like, we're going to take over the investigation on a federal level of this incident, and then we're going to investigate the whole police department, and it shifts to something, this belief of the police department, which that definitely has a negative effect down the road.
Jason, do you want to pick that up and respond to any of that?
Yeah, I would say, you know, I read Charles's piece, which was wonderfully written, but there are a lot of things I disagree with. If there are systemic problems within a police department, that needs to be investigated. He referenced the DOJ report in Baltimore and said there was vague discrimination. I mean, they strip searched a woman in public on a sidewalk for a missing headlight. I'm from Baltimore, so or at least the Baltimore area. And, they had the gun trace task force, which wasn't in the report, where people were planting guns and stealing drugs and selling them back on the street. These were police officers. This is problematic. And I think if there are certain circumstances which could show that there are systemic problems, then you have to see if there are systemic problems, because that keeps us all less safe. We need good police officers. We need strong police departments. And if there are problems that are systemic, they need to be looked at. And in the case of Baltimore, there was a 163-page report. I read it. And, you talk about Freddie Gray. There was the case of Dondi Johnson, who was taken on a rough ride for urinating in public and ended up getting paralyzed and then eventually dying. Now, what happened in that case was a poor city like Baltimore had to pay out $7.5 million in a settlement for that. These are the things that we can avoid. Chicago, where I know Charles is from, they paid out hundreds of millions of dollars out of taxpayers' pockets. So if we need to fix systemic problems, those need to be investigated. Those need to be, they need oversight. And that's what the Department of Justice is for oversight when local areas are failing.
Yeah, and I brought up crime a minute ago because I do think crime is rising in some cities, not all cities, but some cities, and there's more, the public is clearly very concerned about it. So on one hand, I think there's maybe more interest from the public, from people, in having more policing or wanting the police to address this problem. So then it is an issue of priorities, though, when, well, does more police mean we have more encounters that most people are very horrified at what happens, more banging down people's doors, more, rough rides, that kind of stuff. So it's an interesting moment for the police, because I don't know if the criminal justice reform movement is kind of sputtering or is losing some momentum after having, a kind of a good run for a couple of years, First Step Act, stuff like that. But it's not that, it shouldn't be that having criminal justice reform and having good and effective policing are necessarily in opposition. But that might be, I don't know, that might be the perception. What's your feelings about this, Charles?
Well, I think the issue is not what Jason was saying, is these things are complicated and nuanced. And because he picked some egregious cases, but we can do the same thing on the other side, obviously, right? The problem is, one, the belief that Fed equals good, right? So we bring in the feds because local government is corrupt and someone needs to come in and have oversight. But we obviously we can spend hours on the problems with the federal government, systemic problems within the federal government, what they do, and egregious acts they've done on citizens. So that's the one thing. So it doesn't necessarily fix it. But there's also another side, like you're saying, Robbie, there's a cost to this, right? So you mentioned Chicago. In the piece you talk about, or you gave a couple of examples of some things that they did they shouldn't have done. But in Chicago, you have cases where people are being released, violent criminals, in New York and other places, and what it causes the community and the citizens, them being unsafe, but also the police officers leaving. I guess, you talked about a qualified immunity and the consent decree. Well, right now, the mayor of New Orleans is trying to roll that back. Is saying it's hurting the city, the safety of the city, and the police. A lot of police forces, New York and Chicago, are hemorrhaging police officers. So you have to keep them accountable. It's not giving them a pass, but it also hurts the citizens when there are not enough police. Good policing is important, but no police is pretty bad, right? And, you talk about the qualified immunity, being able to sue police officers civilly. All of these things are going to make police both sit on their hands or quit, and you don't get positive results in the community from those actions either.
Yeah, Jason, talk a little bit about, how you see this sort of current crisis in recruiting, within the police departments. I take Charles's point about how that's being impacted by this perceived tension between, the federal government on the one hand and then individual police departments. Do you think that is a problem? Do you think that, having a shortage of police officers, good police officers, is related to any of the rising crime, any of the problems we're seeing in lower income neighborhoods?
So I think a lot of the rise in crime, there are many causes of that. And we're actually, I have to give Chicago and the Chicago Police Department a little bit of credit because their homicide numbers have actually gone down recently. So I think a lot of this came from us all facing a circumstance that we were not accustomed to, which was the pandemic, when you saw violent crime rise to historic levels. And we were facing a circumstance that most of us were not accustomed to. But I think what you need is good police. And in order to recruit police, by the way, no one talks about the fact that we're facing a shortage of teachers as well. There are a lot of civil servant jobs that we're facing a shortage of. But I don't think that making police abide by the law that they are actually tasked to defend is what's keeping police officers from doing their jobs. If it is, if police officers want carte blanche to actually break the law, then they shouldn't be police officers, and they're not making the communities any safer. I think what we need to do, in my opinion, it's the same thing for many civil servants, is we need to pay them more. I think police officers should be paid more in a lot of different areas. I think the same thing for teachers, and then you'll be able to recruit them more. It shouldn't be a fallback profession. It's something that we should expect professionalism. And when I pay you more, that means I can expect more. And you'll get a different kind of person who wants to be a police officer, not someone who will break the law or feel like they have to sell drugs in their spare time. So for me, the rise in crime is related to a lot of different factors, but I don't think it's because police don't want to police or anything like that. I think if they don't want to police and they don't want to do the job, then they really don't want to be police officers. But I think there are ways that we can recruit more police officers, and it starts with actually finding ways to pay them more.
Well, I don't think that's the main reason either. I think the main reason is that if you look at the people who are being arrested, when they are caught, there are multiple offenses, right? It's like this is the guy's 18th arrest in his 5th violent offense. So the issue is people letting them back on the streets when they've committed violent crime. And if we want to have a federal investigation and oversight on police to make sure they do right, because they're civil servants, the same should go for the judge who released someone because it was overcrowding or because he was worried about coronavirus, and then the person went and killed his accuser, right? So you gave some scenarios where the police were bad. We can list out many where innocent people have been harmed by repeat offenders too. And that is part of the problem. So it's a police shortage and the fact that these DAs and many people are just allowing people back on the street. Violent criminals, not non-violent criminals.
Yeah, I think that's a separate issue. But what I will say is that we all know that longer sentences do nothing to reduce crime. They actually increase recidivism. That's what a lot of people don't realize. So they're like, why don't DAs put these people away for longer periods of time? What does reduce crime is the certainty of being caught. Now, that's actually, so much research that backs this up. Actually, you can look at DOJ reports that actually show that this is the truth. It's the certainty of being caught. Now, if you look at a city like Chicago, your home city, Charles, they solved at one point 47% of murders when the victim was white, 22% of murders when the victim was black. So if you're not solving a lot of murders, and like I said, they're getting better at this, but if you're not solving murders, and that's more of a policing issue than the issue of progressive DAs or anything like that, or them being let out for violent crimes. As a matter of fact, we look at a lot of these so-called progressive DAs, whether it's, and hopefully this is a piece that I'll put out on on Newsweek or some other platform. If you look at progressive DAs like Gascon in LA, or even the one who got recalled, Chesa Bowden, they actually had similar or more charges filed than their predecessors did. And a lot of the people in that state, if we're talking about California, for example, actually the DAs who were less progressive had even bigger spikes in murders. This is not an issue about charging violent crime because progressive prosecutors do that. What they don't do necessarily, or what they do is try to divert people for small, low-level crimes to alternatives to incarceration. There are a lot of crimes that we find, and I was talking to a police officer about this recently. Most of the crimes that they find are crimes of need, not of crimes of want. So I think we need to address a lot of other social issues. And I also, the police chief, or one police chief that I know, actually, he told me you'll never arrest your way out of social problems. We've tried that a million times. So I think we need to address a lot of our other issues in society, and find ways to recruit good police officers and hold them accountable when they go afoul of the law.
Charles, we'll give you the last word.
Oh, well, man, we could do an hour just on that last piece. I disagree with the last piece. Most of what he said is totally sensible, though. Totally. But that part about, and really, the last thing I'll say is that stats can be skewed. You have to look at everything in full. So he's right about, in Chicago, the percentage of white victims, their murders being closed more than blacks, 100% true. But you need all the information. And what's missing there that's so important is, unfortunately, for men like myself and Jason, blacks and other minorities were in upwards of 95% of the murders in Chicago. So yes, they solved more of the white murders, but that was like 3% of the murders. So you need all of that information. But this is just not enough time. It's been great. I just think that violent criminals being released because long sentences may or may not be good is bad in the immediate term.
Well, Charles and Jason, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Charles.
Thank you.
And stay with us for more Rising right after this.